Hi, in this video tutorial I want to show you how to use depth of field in Maya. So just to go over what depth of field is the depth of field is the area that is within focus depending on your camera distance as well as the focal length choice. So wider angle lenses tend to have a larger depth of field than long lenses. So long lenses are like your 100 millimeter, 200 millimeter, and so forth, length of lens. Those tend to have a narrower depth of field in that there is more out of focus in the background and the foreground, whereas wider angle lenses tend to have a more pronounced depth of field, as you can see here in this image. So we can use this in Maya to focus the user's attention on what we want them to. Also, it gives a certain amount of realism to images that we render if they're like we're used to seeing them in a photograph. And I should say this idea of depth of field isn't really something that your eyes do. Your eyes focus on different points in front of you. So you may focus on something that's close to you, like text, if you're reading a book, but then you can look up and you can see things far in the distance as clearly as you can. This is really a photography phenomenon, a phenomenon of the camera lens. So we're really recreating what we're used to seeing when we look at a photograph, not what we actually see with our eyes. So I've got our scene set up, and in this scene I have a camera that I've already pre-positioned to take advantage of this. And you can see here that I have three objects that are at different distances from my camera. The sphere is in front of, the cylinder is behind, and here's my cube, which I'm focused on. This is what my camera is seeing, is focusing on right here, this blue cube. So there's two things that I need to concern myself with when I'm looking at depth of field. One is the distance the camera takes to the object that I want to be in focus. And two is this idea of f-stop of the camera. So f-stop has to do really with how much light hits the camera, the film of your camera, or the chip of your camera. In digital, in animation, in Maya, really there is no f-stop. I can have very little light and take a very, the same kind of picture that I would with bright light. The f-stop is again a photographic kind of idea. The f-stop says how long or large the shutter is open for, how much light is exposed to the film. As you may or may not know, if you've studied photography, you would know this, that the longer that the shutter is open, the more light strikes the camera, and therefore if we have a dim image in front of us, like a dark, dusky kind of evening lighting, the longer that we expose the film to the light, the more detail, the more it impresses on the film. So the f-stop is related to how that is open. We don't really have that here, but Maya's camera is made to recreate a physical camera. So we can utilize still this f-stop idea. And the f-stop idea is really related to the depth of field. The more light that comes into the camera, the larger the depth of field, the deeper the depth of field. So we can play around with that a lot here, independent of the lighting condition that we actually have, which is nice. In the real world photography, the only way to change your f-stop and keep a well-exposed image is to add or subtract light. And a lot of times in movies, a lot of time is spent on a movie set getting the lighting just right to make sure that the f-stop is the correct f-stop that the director of photography wants for a particular kind of lens effect. So I've set this up here, and we're just going to do it. So here's my camera, here's my view. So the first thing I want to do in Maya is I want to activate the depth of field within my camera view. So here within camera 1 is where I'm going to want to see my depth of field. I don't care about the perspective camera. I'm using it just to move around. So here in my camera 1 view, I'm going to go to the shading command, and I see here depth of field, and I can't really check it yet. It's not active. So let me go to the camera 1 attribute editor, and I'm going to go to the shape node. So here's my transform node, placement where my camera is, and here's my what's called the shape node, the actual camera itself. And it tells you what it is. Here's my camera focal length, 35mm lens. Down here in these other attributes, you'll see eventually depth of field. So I'm going to click on this depth of field, and I'm just going to check the box. Now I can come back to my shading, and my depth of field is active, so I'm going to activate it. Let me get rid of the grid here. We don't need that. So now you see that pretty much everything is out of focus because I really don't have any kind of focus distance or f-stop set. It's just kind of what it was. So the first thing I want to find out is this number. And this number is the distance from the camera takes to the object. Now here the camera has an aim. I'm using a camera and aim. So let me go to the outliner and select that aim. Let me undock the outliner here. So here's the aim right here. I'll select it. Here's my camera. So what I want to find is the distance that this camera takes to this aim, which is right here. Okay. So how I find that out is I go to display, heads up display, focal length. Nope, that's not it. Sorry about that. Object details. There we go. I don't need focal length. I can have focal length here, that's useful, but I'm not actually wanting it. What I want here, I don't want frame rate either. Let me get rid of some of this stuff. Frame rate, focal length, the rest of it. Object details. That's what I want here. Object details. So you'll notice that one of the object details is distance from camera. And you'll notice something. Here in this camera 1 view, the object I've selected, which is my camera and aim, tells me the distance from a camera. Here in the perspective view, my camera is the perspective camera, and it shows me that this is a different distance from that camera. This camera is farther away than this camera. So in the camera view that I want to render, this is the number that I want. Now, unfortunately, you'll notice that in the attribute editor has now become my aim shape. If I select my camera, then I get an entirely different distance from camera. So that means that I have to kind of either write this number down, 18.129, or remember it. I can't copy it from here. So that's unfortunate. But I got to either remember it or write it down. Then I'm going to select the camera. And in this focal distance, I'm going to enter that number, 18.129. Okay. So you'll notice not much changed, except this area is noticeably sharper, especially when you look on the floor. Right. But because my f-stop is so small that it's just like a slice across that distance from the camera. If I increase the f-stop, notice how my depth of field changes. So I can play with this until I get just the amount that I want of being out of focus. I'm going to click into that panel and I'm going to render it over here to show you what it looks like. Stop that. I don't want to render that camera. I want to render this camera. It won't render my camera. There we go. That's why. Close. No. Huh. Okay. I don't know why it won't render my camera. Maybe it'll do it over here. Please select the camera you want to render. There we go. Let's render that. There we go. And you can see my depth of field. Sorry about all the window messages. That's Maya trying to render. But now you can see that, now that I can get it to render this view, you can see how the depth of field is actually applied.